thousands of children have run the very first maths diagnostic and the very first GPS diagnostic. And what that means is that we can kind of peer into what's happening in year six classrooms all over the UK, and we can have a look at some of the gaps or some of the things that are coming up and some of the challenges that our little year sixes out there are already facing right now. So, Kate,
Yeah, so
what have we got insights wise?
Yeah, we have. We've had hundreds of pupils complete the first few springboards now. So I've taken a couple of questions from GPS2 diagnostic and share with you a couple of the questions that were trickiest for our year sixes. So the hardest question for pupils on GPS2 was question 14. And this question's asking pupils to type one word to show the changing room belongs to all of the girls. So only 32% of our pupils could use an apostrophe correctly to show possession at the end of that plural word there. The most common misconception was to enter the plural word with no apostrophes whatsoever. And 30% of children did that. And another common misconception was to use the apostrophe before the S rather than after it.
This is what I would have done, Kate. I'd have done this.
You and many others, I suspect, Heather. 19% of our pupils made that mistake. But this is an objective from the punctuation taught in year 4. And so without regular retrieval and revision, it's totally understandable that pupils have forgotten the rules around possessive apostrophes for plurals. And I mean, we do know many adults struggle with this as well, don't we, to be fair?
Yeah. So just this question, this is something that you guys can try. You can use this, can't you? You could put this question up in front of your year sixes tomorrow and see how, are your year six in that 32% who used that apostrophe correctly. Remember, this is a year 4 objective, but it has been a little while and we have got all the COVID to deal with.
For pupils who struggled with this question, teachers could choose to assign a mastery set using apostrophes for plural possession or a revision set, a punctuation topic review set. Another tricky question on GPS2 was asking pupils to identify 2 determiners in a sentence, and only 37% of pupils could answer this correctly. This is a word class objective taught in year 3, so it could have been an age ago to a 10-year-old. A common misconception here was to identify the verb invited as well as the as the determiner. So pupils here would probably benefit with some help with understanding the relationship between determiners and nouns. And for those pupils, teachers could choose to allocate the mastery set used determiners, or if they thought it was more suitable, as a practice set called practice identifying articles. We can also see the overall mean and mode scores for Springboard GPS 1 there on the slide. And the difference between them is interesting because it does look like while there are plenty of pupils who are secure with the bulk of the year 1 to 5 content, there are even more pupils with low scores to pull that mean down. So the challenge is, how do you cater for both of those groups at once? And we'll find out more about that in a minute, maybe.
Yeah, I just absolutely find these insights just really fascinating. And for people who are interested in these insights and for benchmarking questions that you might want to use with your year 6 class, especially as we go through this year, we're going to have another webinar in January that's just about these insights. So you can see, how are you guys getting along compared to what's happening in the rest of the UK? If you're finding that, we're seeing the same kind of gaps, in our classes, please do share that on the comments then, just reassure people that they're not alone. But we can see this over thousands and thousands of children, that for the GPS now, we've got some children that are really able, but we've got some children that, are really struggling with this. We've got 2 very different kind of groups that are starting to form across the UK. And how are you going to cope with that once you're in the classroom? Daryl, what's it looking like for maths? Because everybody was saying at the beginning of this, webinar that, maths is the struggle at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting. It's been a definite eye-opener having a good dig through these. I've probably spent way too long having a good look at them. Maybe some of them are a bit less surprising if you've taught year 6 for a long time, but as there's hardly any year 6 content in our first diagnostic, it's a good one to use early. So one of the first ones that's caused a lot of issues is quite a simple fraction on a number line. Many year 6 pupils have struggled with this. In fact, for 90% of classes, it was one of their top 3 areas that they needed to address. So that implies that the basic understanding of fractions, quite a few people saying it on the chat before as well, it just isn't there yet. And certainly if it was presented in a slightly unfamiliar way, not on a shape, on a number line, for example, causing some issues. And the second one, fundamental knowledge, really, going into year 6, the decimal equivalent of 3/4. Very straightforward. You know, they're not tricky word problems, these. They're very, very straightforward. Bit of fundamental knowledge there. Top misconception being 3.4, as you might expect, but that indicates that children just have no idea about what a fraction is at all. The last one was perhaps a bit less surprising. It was question 20. The last one is a multi-step problem. They had to calculate the area of that shape there. There was some missing side lengths as well. So that does kind of indicate how our diagnostics are structured as well. They're not just all very simple questions. They do build, there's some problem solving in there as well. So the first two, particularly interesting, because as Sophie explained a few slides earlier, fractions is one of the most heavily tested content domains, and also it pops up in other areas of the curriculum as well. So not having that basic understanding of even year 3 and 4 objectives indicates that there's far more significant problems that are going to come, unfortunately, once you get onto the year 5 and 6 fractions work as well. So got to quickly address those, as quickly as we possibly can. Overall, the mean score of 11.8 was pretty good. Children aren't completely starting from scratch. They have remembered some things. The mode was quite close to that, but it does suggest that there's already about 9 gaps for a typical year 6 pupil at the moment, and that's at the very start of year 6, just from the year 3 to 5 content. So it really is an uphill battle for year 6 teachers from the off, which I think we were hearing about a lot on the chat earlier on. So those classes sorry, I clicked it a bit too soon. Those classes all had mastery question sets suggested for them, which go right back to basics, pictorial representations, build them right up until they're at the appropriate level. So now I'll pass back to you, Heather.
Thank you. I just want to reassure everybody who's watching this that you can access Learning by Questions for free. We are funded by a charity for 6 weeks, for half a term. And within that, for free, you would get the first 3 diagnostics in maths and the first 3 diagnostics in GPS. So you could run these and you could benchmark and you could see where your children are at, and you could see whether that matches with what we've been going through tonight in terms of what we're seeing across the whole of the country there. Sophie, you put 1 or 2 of these questions out on the social, didn't you? And you found that was actually almost like a kind of emotive response from lots of teachers trying them with their year 6 class and so on.
Yeah, there was a particularly strong response from the fraction one, which I think popped up earlier, actually, and Darryl showed it on a number line, and the children had to place the fraction. And again, I believe the most common misconception was counting the lines instead of the sections, which I know my children do all the time. But I was quite shocked to see that was the most incorrectly answered question. I think a lot of other year 6 teachers were as well, and sort of was a real shock to the system. And kind of, I know I gave it to my class the next day thinking, please tell me that you can do this, and then very quickly covered it in the lesson. So yeah, it provoked a lot of discussion from people.
I think that's going to be that is the truth of what we're doing here. And you'll be able to run these diagnostics and find out for yourself exactly where your class is and what they know. And then we'll come back to you in January and go, how's that looking against everybody else? But like I said, you can have a half a term, you can have 6 weeks completely free with Learning by Questions. And you can run the diagnostics for yourself and find out how your children are getting on. So what I'm interested in is we can see that these are the gaps, the national gaps that are starting to form are really clear, and they certainly mesh with what people were saying in the comments at the beginning of the webinar. And how does that overlap? What's the Venn diagram like between Sophie's analysis of what's likely to come up and where the gaps currently are, Darryl? I think we have a slide, don't we, to compare the two. Here we are. Filling in our gaps, building our skyscraper. So yeah, I don't think there's going to be a lot of massive surprises here about the maths. We've got the fractions in there, and that is the largest, content domain that's likely to come up. Well, not the second largest, with 25%. And then over in GPS, we've got G1 and G5. They're the heavy hitters, and that is where we're seeing the gaps already. And so as Daryl and Kay have pointed out, we are kind of looking like, the gaps are fitting where we're going to need most of the learning to happen